Hi everyone, my name is Hernan. Thank you for joining me one more time in this channel where we see how to solve problems using Unity and C#, and sometimes also Blender. The idea for this video is how you can define a cooldown for a certain action. For example, if your character has a power movement, or maybe your character can heal, maybe you want to stop the player from spamming the heal button, for example. So when a certain action is performed, the player must wait a certain time to be able to use that action again. That's the idea for this video. And here I have a scene where I've already created a couple buttons, text. Here I have an audio source. So for this example, I'm gonna play a sound when I press this button, and that's the action we want to limit using the cooldown. So let's begin by creating a C# script. Create MonoHero script. Let's call it, I don't know, cooldown example. Let's wait until Unity compiles, and I'm gonna create an empty game object. Let's call it script-cooldown. Just an empty game object to assign my new script. And in this script, we want to define a couple variables. So let's open this script in Visual Studio, and let's define an audio source variable to hold the reference of the audio source that is gonna play the sound. Public audio source. Let's call it, I don't know, my audio source. Let's also define a reference for the clip that this audio source will play. Public audio clip, I don't know, test sound, for example, just a name. Let's go to Unity. As these variables are public, they appear here in the inspector, so we can take them from the hierarchy, for example, and drag it to these fields. In this case, I'm going to drag this audio source game object that contains an audio source component into this audio source variable. So now in this variable, we have the reference of this audio source component, and we can use it to play a sound, for example. Now for the test sound, I'm going to choose the sound from the library and pressing this button. In this project, I have a couple sounds, so I'm just going to take this window shutter. So now these variables are initialized, so we can move on. Let's so now let's define a function, the function that represents the action that we want to limit using the cooldown. And let's choose a generic name. For example, let's name this function public void perform action. So this action could be play a sound, but also could be, I don't know, heal the player. So inside this function, we use our audio source variable, and with the dot operator, call the play one shot function, passing the test sound as parameter. So that will play the sound. So when we call this function, the sound should play. And to test it, we can define here in the update function, we can read the spacebar. For example, if keyboard.current.spaceKey was pressed this frame, if the spacebar was pressed this frame, then we perform our action. So we can call that action by pressing the spacebar, but we can also link that action to our button. So let's let's select our button, go to the onClick event, add a new onClick event, drag the script, the game object that has the script with the function inside, and using this drop-down menu, let's choose the perform action function. So when the button is pressed, this function will be called. So we can just hit play and test if this is already working. Just gonna lower a bit the volume. Oh, right. So now if I press this button, I'm gonna lower a bit the volume. There. So if I press this button, the sound plays, but I can also play the sound by pressing the spacebar. And I can spam that action, and I don't have any limit on performing these actions. So now we want to define a cooldown for this action. So let's make a little pause. If you are enjoying this video, please leave a like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. So let's quit the play mode, go to our script, and we basically need two variables, two float variables. Let's public float cooldown counter, a variable to count the time, and we can also define a public float cooldown max time, for example. And let's I don't know, here you can define the time you have to wait before you can perform the action again. Let's I don't know, 2 seconds, for example. Let's assign a value. We can modify that value from the inspector later. So now, how we can limit the action? The idea is that you only will perform the action if the cooldown counter is less or equal to 0, for example. So here, perform action if cooldown counter is less or equal to 0. We perform our action. And now, if we perform the action, we assign to the cooldown counter the cooldown max time. So now if we want to perform the action, this is going to be false and we won't be able to make that action. Now we have to decrement this variable, so at some point it will be less or equal to 0 again, and we will be able to perform the action again. That's something that you can do on the update function. Here, for example, we can take this cooldown counter variable and subtract Time.deltaTime. I have another video in which we analyze what happens if you increment or decrement Time.deltaTime inside an update function. I'm gonna leave it on the corner if you want to watch it. But this instruction will basically decrement this variable 1 unit per second. But we want to do that only if cooldown counter is greater than 0. Cooldown counter greater than 0, then cooldown counter subtract Time.deltaTime. So now let's go back to Unity and hit play to see what happens. As you can see, cooldown counter is 0. So when we press the button, cooldown counter initializes in this variable and it decrements over time. So here we can write, for example, 5 seconds, and now if I press this button, I have to wait 5 seconds to perform the action again. I haven't tried, but so when I press this button, you can hear the sound, but if I press it again, you cannot hear it because the action is not being performed. Once the cooldown counter is less than 0, then I can perform the action again. And I can also press the spacebar to hear the sound, but if I spam the spacebar, you won't hear any sound until the cooldown counter is less than 0. So this is basically the idea. Now let's do let's use this text just to make something more with this example. Let's define here a public tmp underscore text text, I don't know, just a name. So I define this variable to assign this text in this field, and then we can write it here in the script. So what can we do with this text? I think I'm gonna display, when you are able to perform the action, I'm gonna display ready, so you know that you can use the action. And once you use the action and you are waiting to use it again, I'm gonna display a loading percentage. I think that would be nice. Remember, you can perform the action if the cooldown counter is less or equal than 0. So here in the update function, which executes once per frame, we can set the text here So we will see the text changes. So this if statement, cooldown counter greater than 0, represents the moment in which we cannot perform the action. So now here we are waiting, cannot perform action. So here we want to display the loading percentage. Show loading percentage on text. And if here we define an else, this is the moment when we can perform the action. Action can be performed. Display ready on text. This is super simple. You just use the text variable, text cooldown dot text, and you assign a string, for example, ready. You can write the text in this way. So this part is already solved. Now we have to define a percentage. So in this other part, we first need to calculate the loading percentage. Here we need to use a bit of math. Let's take cooldown counter and divide it by cooldown max time. So now we have, so when cooldown counter is equal to cooldown max time, we have a 1, and when cooldown counter is 0, we have a 0. This results in 0. But we need the opposite because the cooldown counter variable is decrementing. So we need to make 1 minus cooldown counter divided by cooldown max time. Now we have a variable that starts in 0 and goes to 1. We can multiply this percentage by 100. And then we can also clamp this variable, math f.clamp percentage. So between 0 and 100. And now use this value to write the text. So text cooldown dot text equals to percentage to string. We can define a precision, for example, F1 to display only 1 decimal. And we can also add the percentage sign like this. So hopefully when we enter in the play mode, we are gonna see that it's already working. No, it's not, because as you can see here in the inspector, this text cooldown variable is empty. I haven't assigned any text on this variable. So now in the console you can see a null reference exception because I'm trying to write a text variable which is empty, which doesn't contain any text. So let's quit the play mode. Let's assign this text in this field in the inspector and now hit play again and hopefully it would be working. Now we see the text ready, we press the button and we see the percentage. So this is it. I hope you found this video useful, and if you want you can clone this project from my GitHub account. I'm gonna leave it in the description. This is my GitHub account. You can also follow me if you want. Here you have a video on how to clone a Unity project, and this is the project that we are using in this video. So thank you for watching. Please leave a like, subscribe, and I see you in the next video. Bye.